My name is Mia Harper. I'm 30 years old. Now, my brother is lying unconscious in the remains of my $9,000 wedding cake. He's face down in cream and crumbs on the floor of a Napa winery that cost about $95,000 to rent. And while everyone is screaming and filming, I'm sitting there in my lace dress thinking, that was the best $95,000 I ever spent. Because just a couple of hours earlier, Tyler slipped something into my drink, planning to make me look crazy in front of 350 guests. Before I tell you how my golden boy brother ended up eating the floor instead of giving his big toast, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe, because you won't believe how it all turned out. Of course, I didn't grow up around wineries and $9,000 cakes. I grew up in the dusty suburbs of Phoenix, in a beige one-story house where the air conditioner never stopped groaning. In that house, I was the responsible one before I even knew what that word meant. When I was 8, my mom would hand me the grocery list and say, "Mia, check the receipt. Make sure they didn't overcharge us." My brother Tyler, 6 years old with a plastic guitar and a Kool-Aid mustache, would be in the cart, banging on the metal and shouting, "Look at me, I'm a rock star." If he knocked over a display, the cashier would frown, and my mom would just laugh and say, "He's so creative. He feels everything so strongly." If I dropped something, it was, "Mia, you're old enough to know better." That was the rhythm of our house. Larry and Donna Harper, my dad in his faded polo shirts, and my mom in her floral blouses and knockoff perfume. And between them, this invisible scale. On one side, me, quiet, organized, making lists, doing chores without being asked. On the other side, Tyler, loud, impulsive, always in trouble and somehow always the center of attention. By high school, it was obvious even to me. I'd sit at the kitchen table with SAT prep books, highlighting vocabulary words, while Tyler wandered in and out of the room talking about starting a band, making a movie, creating an app, moving to Los Angeles. Every week there was a new dream. Every time he got bored, he called it outgrowing something. When I told my parents I wanted to apply to Arizona State and maybe transfer out of state later, my dad clapped me on the shoulder and said, "That's my girl, always with a plan." It sounded like praise, but it came with a price tag. "We can help a little with books," my mom said that night, "but you're strong, Mia. You can handle loans by yourself." We have to think about Tyler too. He still needs to figure himself out. Tyler, who by then was skipping classes and rediscovering his passion for film, music, design, pick a field, any field. So, I took the loans. I worked at a campus coffee shop at 5 a.m. and a sandwich place at night. Learned to live on instant noodles and secondhand textbooks. When everyone else went out on Fridays, I counted tips and worried about interest rates. I graduated with honors and a stack of debt that felt taller than our old Phoenix house. No one threw me a party. Mom posted one photo on Facebook and wrote, "So proud of my hardworking girl," and then called me to ask if I'd heard Tyler's new podcast concept. Because while I was dragging myself through group projects and part-time jobs, Tyler was becoming a serial entrepreneur. That's what he calls himself now, serial entrepreneur and podcaster. On paper, it sounds impressive. In reality, it was a trail of half-finished ventures that my parents swept up after him. Then came the crypto phase. I still remember the way he sat at the dining table, hunched over his laptop, charts and graphs glowing on the screen. "This is it," he kept saying. "This is the future. You're stuck in corporate, Mia, but I'm going to break free." And a few months later, half of his investments disappeared overnight. He cried in the living room, actual tears, hands over his face. My dad wrapped an arm around him and said, "It happens, son. You took a risk." A week later, my parents refinanced the house to help him with his temporary liquidity issue. When I asked how much they'd given him, my mom just said, "Don't start, please. He's fragile right now. You're just different. You're more stable." I was in Seattle by then, working as a product manager at a mid-sized IT company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. I had health insurance, a 401k, and I had a tiny one-bedroom apartment with peeling linoleum. My parents liked to brag about my big tech job to distant relatives, but whenever it came to actual help or emotional support, it was as if my success canceled out my right to need anything. Then, I met Evan on a Tuesday, which already felt like a sign, because nothing important had ever really happened to me on a weekday before. We were both at a hospital tech conference in San Francisco, me there to present some boring product roadmap, him there because his department was piloting a new cardiac monitoring app my company was building. I noticed him first because he actually listened. Most doctors in those meetings checked their phones, interrupted, or talked over me. Evan sat in the front row, tie slightly crooked, eyes tired in that I've been on call forever way, but focused. He asked smart questions, not to show off, but to understand. When I stumbled over a slide, he didn't smirk. He just gave this tiny, encouraging nod like we were on the same team, even though we'd just met. Afterward, he caught up with me by the coffee urns and said, "You explained all that without a single buzzword. That should get you a medal in this industry." We ended up talking for almost an hour. About tech, medicine, and burnout, and how hospital coffee tasted like punishment. He told me he was a cardiac surgeon at a big San Francisco hospital. I told him I was a product manager up in Seattle, in the land of endless drizzle and Jira tickets. It felt weirdly easy. No performance, no test. Just talking. It was only on our third date that he mentioned the winery. We were eating takeout Thai in a small, but absurdly expensive San Francisco apartment, sitting on the floor because he still hadn't bought a proper table. There was a wine bottle on the counter with Reeves on the label in elegant script, and I joked, "Wow, same name. What are the odds?" He hesitated for a second, then said, "Actually, that is my family. We own a winery up in Napa." Well, my parents do. I just sign whatever my mom emails me. He said it so casually I almost missed it. But I laughed it off until I Googled it later in my hotel room and realized his family winery was the Reeves estate I'd seen on restaurant menus, in glossy magazines, on charity gala brochures. When I visited the winery for the first time, I felt like I'd entered another planet. Rows and rows of vines, old stone buildings, the air smelling like earth and oak barrels instead of hot asphalt. In the tasting room, there were framed magazine covers, awards, foundation letters. Reeves Family Scholarship. Reeves Heart Health Initiative. Their name was everywhere. I kept waiting for someone to look at me and see right through me. The girl from the Phoenix suburbs who'd paid her own way through college, who still checked restaurant prices before ordering. But Margaret and Thomas Reeves shook my hand, asked about my work, and then, to my shock, actually listened. No one made a big deal about my job in tech, but no one dismissed it as just corporate either. Evan never treated me like a trophy he was bringing home. When we talked about his work schedule, my deadlines, where we'd live if things got serious, he said we like it was obvious. When he proposed, it was quiet. No flash mob, no staged sunset photo shoot. We were at the winery, in a small courtyard near an old olive tree, after a long family lunch. My heels were off, my hair was a mess, and I had a stain from tomato sauce on my dress. He just took my hand, looked a little nervous, and said, "Mia, I want us to build something steady together. Will you marry me?" I cried, obviously. Not just because I loved him, but because in that moment I could see a different kind of family than the one I grew up in, a family where love wasn't measured by who needed rescuing the most, where respect wasn't conditional. So, telling my parents and Tyler was a different story. On the phone, my mom screamed first, of course, hi, and excited. "A doctor? In San Francisco? Oh, honey, this is amazing." Then came the questions about the winery, the name, the photos. My dad said he was happy for me, but I could already hear the wheels turning in his head, the way he repeated Napa like he was tasting an expensive word. Tyler found out in our family group chat. I sent a picture of the ring, my hand shaking just enough that the shot was slightly blurred. For a moment, there was silence. Then Mom's emojis, Dad's congrats, kiddo, and finally Tyler's message. "Damn, Mia. Didn't know you were into arranged mergers and acquisitions." At first, I told myself it was a joke. Classic Tyler, making everything into content. But it didn't stop. When we were on a video call and Evan walked past in scrubs, Tyler said, "Oh look, future Mrs. Heart Surgeon." Smart move, sis. Lock in those benefits. If I mentioned the winery, he'd snort. Yeah, must be nice skipping the whole build your own empire thing and just marrying into one. When he came to visit our parents and I flew down for a weekend, he waited until they were out of the room, then leaned back in his chair and said, "So, be honest. Would you have said yes if he was just some regular guy and not, Reeves?" I stared at him. "I love him, Tyler." He smirked. "Sure. Love. Plus a side of wine dinners and investor uncles." That was how it started, half jokes that stung more than he probably expected. Then the passive aggression kicked in. He'd ignore Evan's messages in the family chat. He'd forget to like any engagement photos while commenting on literally everything else. On his podcast, he did an episode about people who take shortcuts by marrying rich instead of grinding. He didn't use my name, but I could hear myself between the lines. But what hurt most wasn't even his jealousy. It was the way my parents responded to it. Whenever I mentioned his comments, my mom would sigh and say, "He just feels left behind. Don't rub your good fortune in his face." My dad would add, "He's still trying to prove himself, you know that. You've already got your career and a doctor fiancé. Cut him some slack." Wedding planning brought out a side of me I didn't know I had. I had spreadsheets for everything: vendors, payments, seating charts, timelines. From the beginning, I knew I wanted to keep the family part of the ceremony simple. My best friend Kate was my maid of honor. She'd seen me through breakups, layoffs, panic attacks over product launches. If anyone had earned a speech, it was her. My parents would say a short thank you together, 5 minutes, tops. No open mic, no drunken monologues. I'd seen enough weddings derailed by just a few words turning into 10 minutes of oversharing. Tyler was listed in the program as a groomsman. That felt safe. Limited responsibilities. Matching tux. Stand there, smile for photos. I honestly thought he'd be relieved. About 2 months before the wedding, he called me. Not texted, not voice noted, actually called. That alone should have been a warning. So, he started, voice all casual. I was thinking about the reception. I was at my kitchen table, surrounded by sample invitations and color swatches. "What about it?" "Well," he started, stretching the word out, "I'm your brother. It's kind of expected that I give the main toast on behalf of the family, don't you think? How's it gonna look if I don't say a word?" My stomach tightened. "Tyler," I said carefully, "we've already planned the speeches. Kate's doing the maid of honor toast, and Mom and Dad will say something together. We're trying to keep it short. The venue has a strict schedule." He laughed like I'd said something adorable. "Mia, come on. I'm your only sibling. People will think it's weird if I don't talk. And, honestly, my audience will love it. I could even record some of it for the podcast, cross-promote the winery, your tech girl marries doctor story. It's content gold." That word, content, made my skin crawl. This is my wedding, not a podcast episode. Silence crackled on the line for a second, then his tone shifted, just a little. "So you're embarrassed by me now?" "That's not what I said." I replied. "Feels like it," he pushed. "You're marrying into this big fancy family, and suddenly your brother's not good enough to hold a microphone?" I pinched the bridge of my nose. "It's not about being good enough. I just don't want a lot of speeches. That's all." He exhaled loudly. "Right. Got it. Don't worry, Mia. I'll stay in the background. Wouldn't want to ruin your perfect old money fairy tale." The call ended soon after, but the guilt sat with me all evening, heavy and familiar. By the next day, my mother was calling. "Mia," she started, already sounding stressed. "What happened with Tyler? He's very upset." Of course he was. I closed my eyes. "Did he say why?" She sniffed. I could hear dishes in the background, the TV on low. "He feels left out. He said you don't want him to speak at the wedding." "Honey, he's your brother. How do you think that makes him feel?" "Mom, I just don't want too many toasts. We're already tight on time, and you know how he gets with a microphone. He pushes boundaries." Her voice went soft and wet at the edges. "He sees you marrying a rich doctor, moving into this whole new world, and now he feels like you're ashamed of him. Can you spare him a couple of minutes? Just a small toast?" He wants to honor you. Honor me? I thought of the marriage of convenience, jokes, the digs about me locking in benefits. Mom, I'm not ashamed of him, I said. I just want the reception to be about joy, not performances. There was a tiny, practiced pause on her end. Then the tears really came. I could hear her trying to talk through them. You know how sensitive he is. He says he's happy for you, but I can tell he's hurting. You're his sister. Can you make this one little compromise? One little compromise. I'd been making one little compromise for Tyler since I was 8. By the time my dad called, my defenses were already worn down. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, he said bluntly. No preamble. Let your brother talk. He wants to show himself to Evan's family, maybe make some connections. What's the harm? The harm, I said carefully, is that he doesn't have a filter. And I don't want to be standing there in a white dress while he improvises a stand-up routine about my life. He's a grown man, my dad shot back. Give him some credit. Besides, people expect it. Brother of the bride, big heartfelt speech. You don't want whispers about family drama at your fancy Napa wedding, do you? That stung because it landed right on top of my biggest fear. I held out for another day, maybe 2. I talked it over with Kate, who said, it's your wedding, you can say no, but even she sounded uncertain, like she knew how these things went in real families, not on Pinterest boards. In the end, the script was familiar. My parents sighed, Tyler sulked loudly, and I caved. I emailed the planner and asked her to adjust the schedule. We added a specific line item after my dad's short thank you. Bride's brother's toast, 5 minutes. I sent the updated program to everyone, fingers heavy on the keyboard. Tyler texted me a thumbs up emoji and, a second later, don't worry sis. I'll make it unforgettable. I should have listened to the tiny voice in my head that flinched at that word. At the time, it felt like the path of least resistance. One speech. 5 minutes. How bad could it be? The closer we got to the wedding, the more it felt like I was holding everything together with my credit card and a forced smile. By then, most of the big things were paid. The winery deposit, the caterer, the band, the florist. Every payment email made my stomach tighten, even though Evan and I had planned the budget carefully and split things fairly. Until Tyler turned my wedding into his personal funding opportunity. It started with the tux. We were on a video call going over logistics when he casually dropped so about my suit. You're a groomsman, I reminded him. We sent everyone the rental link. It's like $200. He made a face. Yeah, but this is a Reeves Winery wedding, Mia. Photos for generations, right? I can't show up in some shiny rental that looks like a high school prom. I found this amazing tux, classic cut, super clean lines. It'll actually match the vibe. How much? I asked, already bracing myself. He shrugged. Only $1,200. Plus alterations. And flights, obviously. I'm putting everything in my business on hold to be there for you, so I kinda need help covering it. There it was. Not a request, exactly. Tyler, we already have so many expenses, I started. Could you at least cover part of it? And he cut me off. Mia, I'm not asking you to buy me a car. I'm asking you to help me look appropriate at your wedding. Do you want your only brother looking like he got lost on his way to a job interview? He knew exactly which guilt buttons to push. I pictured him standing next to Evan's polished friends, imagined my parents' faces if he showed up in something cheap and mismatched. So I paid. Tux, flights, and a hotel room for 3 nights. When my card dinged with the email receipt, I told myself it was just easier this way. Fewer fights. Less drama. I wish it had stopped there. A couple of weeks later, I got a notification from my credit card company about a large online purchase. I was in a meeting, half listening to an engineer explain a bug, and I almost ignored it. But during a break, I finally opened the app. $2,300. Charged to a streaming equipment store. My first thought was fraud. Then I saw the shipping name. Tyler Harper. I called him so fast my hands shook. Hey, Bridezilla, he answered, way too cheerful. What's up? Did you just charge over $2,000 to my card? I didn't bother softening it. He didn't even sound guilty. Oh, that. Relax. It's not for you, it's about you. I got cameras, mics, the whole setup. I'm going to live stream parts of the wedding, behind the scenes, the speech, my audience is going to eat it up. This is a win-win. Exposure for the winery, your big day documented professionally, my podcast boosted. You're welcome. You had no right to use my card, I said, heat rising up my neck. Tyler, that's thousands of dollars. He clicked his tongue. Wow. Okay. First of all, chill. I thought it was the joint card mom uses for family stuff. The numbers are almost the same. Honest mistake. But it's not like I bought a PlayStation. This is for your wedding content. People pay big money for this stuff. You didn't even ask me, I insisted. I don't want my wedding turned into a marketing stunt. He sighed dramatically. You're overreacting. Again. You're marrying a surgeon with a vineyard, Mia. You make money. I'm the one pausing my business to come down there. This gear will pay itself off with the traffic it brings. If it bothers you so much, I'll pay you back after the launch. Happy? We both knew after the launch meant never. I stared at the spreadsheet on my laptop, the one where the sums at the bottom kept creeping higher. $3,000 for flowers, $7,500 for the band, $18,000 for catering. Toss in a tux here, some flights there, accidental equipment rentals. What was a couple thousand more when I was already drowning in five-figure totals? The wedding day looked exactly like every glossy mood board I'd saved at 2 a.m. when this was still just a fantasy. The Rivs of Family Winery in Napa was all soft gold and green when we arrived, sun melting over the rows of vines that seemed to run forever. The air smelled like warm earth, oak barrels, and expensive perfume. Staff in black and white moved, carrying trays of sparkling wine and tiny canapes that looked too pretty to eat. Everywhere I turned, there were people. About 350 guests, Evan's relatives from all corners of the country, his colleagues from the hospital, partners from the wine distribution business, board members from the family foundation. A few of my coworkers and college friends looked almost intimidated, clutching their champagne flutes and whispering about how they'd never been to a wedding like this. Under the open sky, long wooden tables stretched between rows of vines, dressed in white linen and eucalyptus runners. Garlands of lights were strung overhead, already glowing faintly even though the sun hadn't fully set yet. To one side, giant oak barrels lined the wall, stacked 3 high. On the other side, near the dance floor, stood the big cake. 7 tiers of lemon and raspberry with white cream and sugar flowers on its own round podium like an art installation. The baker had matched the sugar petals to the color of my bouquet. People kept stopping to take pictures with it, as if it were another guest. By the time we made our entrance as husband and wife, my cheeks hurt from smiling. Evan squeezed my hand every few seconds, as if to check I was really there. My dress brushed the floor, catching bits of petals and dust, my veil pinned in place just tight enough to give me a headache. It didn't matter. When the band started playing and everyone clapped as we walked in, I actually felt happy, in a way that made my throat ache. The head table was set on a little raised platform. I sat in the center, Evan on my left, Tyler on my right. Across from us was a slightly lower table where Kate and a few of my closest friends sat, people who'd known me before Napa, before surgeons and wineries and five-figure cakes. In front of every place setting, the same glass of white wine from the family collection. It felt symbolic somehow, like we were all sharing the same thing, even if we came from totally different worlds. Evan's father, Thomas, leaned over at one point, his napkin already slightly stained with red wine. So, Mia, he said, tell me again about that project you led, the one that helped the hospital cut readmissions? I turned toward him, grateful for a question that wasn't about flowers or dress details. I started explaining, slipping into my familiar product manager rhythm, problem, solution, outcome. Evan watched me with this soft, proud look that made my heart flip. And that's when Tyler moved. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his hand reach toward me. Let me just get your phone, he said lightly. It's in all the shots. My phone was lying just next to my wine glass, screen dark, case pale blue against the white tablecloth. I didn't think twice. Tyler was always fiddling with things. I kept my eyes on Thomas, finishing my sentence about metrics. I felt the faint brush of Tyler's arm near my elbow as he leaned in. not knowing what later I would replay those few seconds over and over, like bad footage from a security camera. Tyler's fingers closing around my phone. His other hand, hidden from my angle by my own arm and the back of a floral centerpiece, moving toward my glass. The tiny glint of something in his palm, a small bottle, clear, the kind you might not even notice if you weren't looking for it. He tilted it just slightly over my wine. A few drops of a colorless liquid slid into the glass. For a fraction of a second, the wine foamed, a little fizz rising to the surface and then disappearing as quickly as it came. Anyone who wasn't staring directly at it would have thought it was just carbonation or the light catching the surface. "See?" Tyler said, holding up my phone with a flourish and placing it a bit farther from my plate. "Now the photographer won't have to Photoshop out your notifications." His voice sounded normal. Joking. Helpful, even. I didn't see the bottle. I didn't see the foam. I just smiled politely, answered Thomas's follow-up question, and took a small sip of water from the other glass on my left. Tyler leaned back in his chair, draped one arm over the back like he owned the night, and reached for his own wine. From my perspective, everything was fine. Normal. The kind of slightly chaotic, overly formal normal you expect at a wedding with 350 people. But the only person with a clear view of what he'd actually done was sitting directly across from us. Kate's seat faced the head table, angled perfectly toward me. From there, she could see under Tyler's arm, past the flowers, straight to my glass. She told me later she'd already been watching him because he'd been extra fidgety all evening, checking his watch, his phone, the program, tapping his foot under the table. So when his hand dipped down toward my glass, when she saw the flash of a tiny bottle, when the wine in my glass bubbled for a second, she didn't write it off as nothing. I didn't notice her expression change in real time. I was too busy performing the role of grateful bride and professional daughter-in-law, laughing at Evan's uncle's joke, nodding at something one of the board members said about the view. But Kate went very still. She watched Tyler straighten up, tuck something small back into his jacket pocket, and drain half of his own wine in one swallow. Tyler, I would realize later, was sure everything had gone perfectly. In his head, it must have been simple, at some carefully chosen moment. Maybe during his toast, maybe during the first dance, I'd start slurring my words or blinking too slowly. Maybe I'd stumble as I stood up, knock over a glass. Just enough to look off, unstable. In front of 350 guests, including Evan's influential relatives and partners, he'd be right there to catch me, to kneel dramatically at my side, to say into a conveniently placed microphone how worried he'd been about me. A minute after he moved my phone, I felt it vibrate against the table where he'd set it down. I glanced at the screen, expecting maybe a notification from the photographer's shared album or a random congratulations text. Instead, I saw Kate's name. I thumbed the screen open under the table, heart still light from whatever story Evan's cousin was telling. The message preview filled the top of the screen in all caps, like it was shouting at me. "Swap glasses. Tyler put something in your drink." For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I read Kate's message once, twice, but words didn't change. The sounds around me didn't match what I was reading. The band was playing soft jazz. Silverware clinked on plates. Someone at the table behind us laughed too loudly. Inside my chest, something dropped straight through me. I kept my head slightly tilted, my expression neutral, as if I were just checking a harmless text. Years of don't cause a scene training snapped into place like a seatbelt. Panicking would only make things worse. I knew that in my bones. If I stood up and screamed, "What did you put in my drink?" right now, it would be my word against Tyler's. He'd laugh, offended, then wounded. My parents would rush in, horrified at me. "Mia, how could you say that?" My mother would gasp. "Your brother would never." Evan's family, these calm, composed people from a world of charity galas and foundation meetings, would see exactly what Tyler wanted them to see, a bride on the edge, accusing her own brother of something insane on her wedding day. He'd win again. And this time, it wouldn't just cost me money or pride. It would cost me the way my new family saw me. My thumb hovered over the screen. I typed quickly under the table. "Are you sure?" The reply came almost instantly. "I saw him." Little bottle, wine fizzed. Don't drink. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I slid my phone face down next to my plate and forced myself to take a slow breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth, never imagining I'd use it at my own wedding to stay calm while I sat between my husband and the brother. I stole a tiny glance to my right. Tyler looked normal, relaxed. He was leaning back in his chair, smiling at something one of Evan's cousins had said. His hair was perfectly styled, his tux exactly as sleek and expensive as he'd wanted. There was a light flush on his cheeks from the wine, his eyes bright. He caught my glance and grinned, clinked his glass gently against mine. Don't get too hammered before my speech, okay, sister? He teased under his breath. I suddenly became very aware of the two glasses in front of me. The one he'd tampered with, full of white wine. The untouched water glass. The wine looked completely innocent, like every other glass on the table. I could refuse to drink anymore. That was one option. Keep my hands in my lap, sip only water, guard my glass like a hawk. But I knew Tyler. If he noticed I wasn't touching my wine, he'd adapt. If I confronted him now, he'd twist it. If I involved my parents, they'd cover him. If I ran to the staff, asked for help, I'd have to explain everything in front of 350 people. So I sat still, heartbeat slamming against the inside of my ribs. I lifted my eyes and looked across the table. Kate's face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together. When our gazes met, she raised her eyebrows the tiniest bit, a silent question. Did you see my message? I gave the faintest nod. She glanced at my wine glass, then at Tyler's. Her fingers tightened around her own glass, the only outward sign that she was seconds away from leaping over the table and tackling him if I gave any indication I needed that. I needed an opening. A reason to touch both glasses in a way that wouldn't look strange. Something natural, that would give me 3 seconds where nobody was looking at my hands. The universe, or maybe just years of family dynamics, handed it to me in the form of Margaret Reeves. She approached the head table like she approached everything else, steady, composed, taking in the whole picture. If my mother was a storm of emotion, Margaret was a spine of steel wrapped in silk. Sweetheart, she said, coming up on Evan's left side, your veil is trying to escape. Evan laughed and stood slightly to let her in. She leaned over the table toward me, fingers gentle as she adjusted the comb in my hair. For a second, her perfume, something subtle and expensive, washed over me, grounding me. You look beautiful, she murmured. Then, louder, to Evan, and you clean up nicely too. He rolled his eyes with a smile. Thanks, Mom. She reached down to hug him from the side, one arm around his shoulders, half-turned, blocking the view of the table from most of the room. And that's when Tyler sprang into motion. He shot up from his chair so fast his napkin slid off his lap and onto the floor. Margaret, he said, voice bright and just a touch too loud, I'm so glad you've accepted our family, you have no idea. He moved around behind my chair, putting himself directly in front of her, as if he were the co-star of this little scene and had been waiting for his cue. His back was now to the table, body slightly angled, blocking her line of sight to my hands, to the glasses. That's why I wanted to say a few words tonight, he added quickly, leaning in, his tone earnest. You've been such an inspiration to me as an entrepreneur and... He was rambling, trying to ingratiate himself, to impress her with his vision. Margaret, polite as ever, gave him her attention, listening with that practiced half-smile of someone used to being flattered. No one was looking at me. Not the photographer, not Evan, not Margaret. They were all focused on Tyler. My fingers moved before my fear could catch up. I slid my hands forward, keeping my arms close to my body, and curled my index and middle fingers around the stems of both wine glasses. One was slightly closer, the one Tyler had doctored. The other, identical in shape and color, sat just to the right. In one smooth, small motion, I lifted them both an inch off the table, crossed my wrists, and swapped their positions. As I did, I rotated the glass that had been mine just enough so that the faint ring of my lipstick on the rim turned inward, away from the room, hidden. From the outside, It looked like I was just shifting them so they weren't too close to the edge, making space in front of my plate. My heart hammered so hard I was afraid someone would actually hear it. My hands shook, but the stem stayed steady between my fingers. I set the glasses back down gently. The doctored one was now in front of Tyler's place. The untouched one back in front of mine, disguised as if nothing had changed. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. By the time Margaret straightened up and patted my shoulder, my hands were back in my lap. "There," she said warmly. "Perfect. Try to eat something, Mia. You've been talking more than chewing." "I will," I managed. My voice sounded almost normal. She squeezed Evan's arm once more and moved on to greet someone at the next table. Tyler slid back into his chair, smoothing his jacket, face lit up with the glow of his own performance. He glanced down at the table, quick, automatic, checking the glasses. From his angle, everything was exactly as he'd left it, my glass in front of me, his in front of him. Lipstick on mine. Slightly fewer sips taken from his. He gave me a sideways look, studying my face. I let my features relax, as if I'd had just a little too much to drink. Softened my smile, slowed my blinking. I turned my head a fraction slower when someone called my name. If I was going to let him walk into his own trap, I had to commit. I lifted my glass, the safe one now, and took a tiny sip, just enough to wet my lips. Not enough that he could see the level change from his angle. Then I set it back down, deliberately, like it took a little extra concentration. In conversation, I let pauses stretch longer. When someone made a joke, I smiled beat too late. I stopped using big gestures, my hands resting more heavily on the table. Out of the corner of my eye, I could feel Tyler watching. Testing. He took a small sip from his own glass, the one that had been meant for me. Then another, more confident. The sedative was tasteless and clear. He had no reason to suspect. Why would he? In his mind, he was the hunter, not the bait. At one point, Evan leaned in and asked quietly, "You okay?" "Just a lot of people," I said truthfully. "I'm fine. Promise." He kissed my temple and went back to listening to his colleague talk about some ridiculous case from the operating room. Inside, I repeated one sentence over and over to myself, a grim little mantra that made me feel sick. Fine. You wanted me to be a spectacle at my own wedding? Then you'll give the most beautiful toast yourself. I didn't know exactly how things would play out, how fast the stimulant would hit him, how obvious it would be, what he would say under its influence. But I knew this. For the first time in our lives, I wasn't going to step in front of the damage. Towards the middle of the evening, the lights over the vineyard had gone from pretty to almost unreal. People had eaten, drunk, loosened ties, kicked off heels. The room felt soft around the edges when everyone is relaxed but not yet messy. I could feel Tyler next to me getting heavier in his chair. It was subtle. His laugh lagged half a beat. He blinked more slowly. When he reached for his fork, he misjudged the distance and had to correct, fingers closing on air before they found the metal. To anyone else, it probably looked like he was just a little buzzed. But I knew better. I watched the way his eyes went slightly out of focus when he stared toward the band. The way his shoulders slumped then jerked back up as he tried to sit straighter. The way he kept licking his lips like his mouth was suddenly dry. He glanced at me a couple of times, testing. I made sure my movements stayed just a little bit off, slow enough to reassure him the stimulant was working, but not so dramatic that anyone else would jump in. Finally, the host walked onto the small stage near the dance floor, his voice booming gently through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "if I could have your attention for a very special toast." The chatter dimmed. Chairs turned. Phones came up ready. And now, he announced, grinning toward our table, a toast from the bride's brother, Tyler Harper. The applause that followed was bigger than I expected, loud, enthusiastic, full of that collective anticipation people get at weddings when they smell a moment coming. Tyler pushed himself up from his chair. For a second, his hand gripped the edge of the table a little too hard. "You've got this," I heard him mutter under his breath, like a pep talk to himself. He smoothed his jacket, picked up his glass, and headed toward the microphone stand he'd personally requested be placed right next to the cake. Tyler reached the mic, wrapped his fingers around it, and turned toward the crowd. From where I sat, I could see the slight sway in his stance, the way his knees didn't quite lock. He blinked at the sea of faces and grinned, a little too broadly. "Hey, everybody," he started. His voice echoed through the speakers, louder than it needed to be. "I'm Tyler. I'm, Mia's little brother." "Well, not so little anymore, right?" Polite laughter rippled through the room. He chuckled along, then put a hand to his chest. "First of all, can we just acknowledge how insanely beautiful my sister looks tonight?" More applause. A few whistles. He nodded, soaking it in. "And Evan," he added, turning slightly toward us, "you clean up okay too, man." That actually sounded almost normal. For a second, I wondered if maybe the dose hadn't hit as hard as I thought. Maybe he'd just stumble a bit, give a weird speech, sit back down, and I'd have to live forever with the knowledge of what almost happened. But then, the passive aggression started leaking through. "You know," he said, "growing up, Mia was always the serious one." Like always. He dragged the word out, his tongue a little thick on the S. She had color-coded binders for her homework in, like, 3rd grade. She made chore charts, voluntarily. He paused. "I'm pretty sure she came out of the womb with a to-do list." People laughed again, louder this time. It was the kind of joke you were supposed to find charming at a wedding. Oh, the responsible sister, haha. I felt my smile freeze on my face. Tyler continued, warming up. "And I remember thinking, as kids, that no guy would ever be brave enough to sign up for all that." He gestured vaguely in my direction, nearly clipping the microphone with his hand. "The schedules, the planning, the control." He smirked. "So Evan, man, props to you. I hope you can handle her." I saw a couple of heads turn toward our table, people glancing between me and Evan like they'd just been let in on some private joke. Tyler tried to ride the wave of laughter again, but something in his timing was off. He blinked, looking down at his glass like he wasn't entirely sure how much he'd drunk. The room wobbled slightly in his gaze. "So, he cleared his throat. When Mia told us she was marrying a heart surgeon from a Napa winery family, I was like, of course she is." He laughed at his own joke a second too late. "Leave it to Mia to optimize her love life, right? She doesn't just get a husband, she gets health insurance and a wine club." A few people chuckled, but it was thinner this time. The joke fell off, edged with something sour. From across the table, I saw Kate's jaw tighten. Her phone was already in her hand, angled up, recording. Tyler shifted his weight, as if he'd been standing in one place too long. His shoulders sagged, then he straightened abruptly, fighting the heaviness creeping into his limbs. The sedative was sliding through his bloodstream, winding its way into his muscles, his brain. "Anyway," he continued, voice going a bit misty at the edges, I had this whole thing planned. Like, this whole metaphor about wine and aging and tannins." He frowned. "Tannins? Is that the word?" Awkward laughter flickered through the room. Someone near the back coughed. He shuffled his notes, except he didn't have any notes. Just a folded napkin he'd brought up to look prepared. He stared at it like the words he needed might magically appear there. "What I mean is," he tried again, "Mia has always been the person who holds everything together." He gestured vaguely, nearly clipping the microphone again. "Even when she's not doing great." That last part slipped out slower than the rest, blurry around the edges. My fingers tightened around Evan's under the table. He shook his head, as if trying to clear it. She gets really stressed, you know?" He chuckled weakly. "Sometimes she overreacts to stuff. Can't help it. It's just how her brain is wired. But she means well. And I've always been there to worry about her." I heard the shift in the room. People glancing at each other, at me. A few eyebrows raised. You could tease the bride, sure, but diagnoses and how her brain is wired weren't exactly wedding toast material. Tyler seemed oblivious. Or maybe he was fighting too hard to stand upright to notice social cues. He tried to reset, laughing at nothing. "Anyway, I know Evan will take good care of her. She needs someone to keep her grounded." He trailed off, staring at his own hand like he'd forgotten what it was doing. His words started to tangle. He repeated the same phrase, lost his place, circled back to it again. Mia's always been, always been. Silence fell heavier now. The host shifted slightly at the edge of the dance floor. The band members watched with polite, fixed smiles. Someone's nervous giggle fizzled out halfway. At our table, I could see the moment when my mother realized something was wrong. My father straightened in his chair, his eyes narrowing, ready to be angry at the wrong person, as usual. Tyler blinked, swayed. His grip tightened on his glass. And now, he said, with a sudden burst of energy, I just want to raise a toast to. He took one step back. Just one. But the heel of his shoe caught the edge of the cake podium. Time slowed. His arm jerked to the side, trying to catch his balance. The glass stem snapped in his hand with a sharp, ugly crack. The bowl flew, spinning, hitting the floor with a shatter that seemed to echo even louder through the speakers. Tyler's body followed. He pitched backward, arms flailing, and crashed right into the 7-tier cake. The top layers lurched, slid, and then gravity did the rest. The entire $9,000 masterpiece collapsed in a disastrous, slow-motion avalanche of sponge, cream, and berries. Gasps rose from the crowd like a wave. The podium shook. Plates rattled. The bottom layer gave way, and then he was on the floor, covered in lemon raspberry filling, white frosting streaked through his hair, across his face, down the front of his perfect tux. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Then the microphone, still in its stand, toppled over. It landed on its side, right next to his head. The impact made a loud, hollow thunk that rang through the sound system. And then we heard him. Not the polished, performative Tyler who'd walked up there with jokes and self-importance. A different version. Slurred, fading. Not hers, he mumbled. The words were faint, but the mic was inches from his mouth, so they boomed through the speakers, stark and clear. Not that glass. A stunned hush swept the room. You could have heard a fork drop. I spiked it, he breathed. Around me, people sucked in breath. A woman nearby covered her child's ears too late. Someone whispered, "What did he say?" And someone else answered, horrified, "He said he spiked it." Kate was already on her feet, phone raised, recording. Her hands were steady. Her face was white. I didn't move. My body felt like it had turned to stone, and yet every detail seared into my memory. The way Tyler's chest rose and fell shallowly, his eyes rolled half back in his head. "Call 911, someone shouted. One of Evan's cousins, Ryan, the ER doctor, was at Tyler's side in seconds. He dropped to his knees in the ruined cake, not even noticing the cream staining his suit pants. He pressed 2 fingers to Tyler's neck, then pried one eyelid open, shining the flashlight from his phone into the pupil. His pulse is slow, Ryan said, loud enough for the people nearest to hear. His voice shifted into professional mode, calm and clipped. Constricted pupils. This looks like a sedative on board. Strong one. Another cousin, Mark, the one who worked for the police department, moved closer. He crouched just enough that his voice reached me, Evan, and a few people at the head table, but not the entire hall. If this goes to an investigation, he murmured, eyes flicking to Kate's phone, to the toppled microphone, to the stunned faces around us, that recording and all these witnesses? That's solid evidence. Attempted poisoning, at the very least. I sat there in my wedding dress, hands folded in my lap, and realized that Tyler had finally done something I couldn't clean up for him. The rest of that night is a blur of sirens, sugar, and my parents screaming at the wrong people. The ambulance arrives fast. Ryan rattles off his observations to the paramedics like he's dictating chart notes. They load Tyler onto a stretcher, half covered in what used to be my 7-tier cake. My mom is hysterical. She clings to the side of the stretcher, crying. He's been so stressed. He hasn't been sleeping. He probably mixed up his meds. My dad storms after them, already angry. Not at Tyler, of course. At the staff, the paramedics, the universe. Make sure he gets the best room. Don't you dare treat this like some drunk thing. He's under pressure. I sit there in my wedding dress, hands sticky from where I accidentally touched frosting on the back of my chair, and listen to them rewrite reality in real time. No one from my family asks if I'm okay. But Evan does. He kneels in front of me so we're eye level, one hand on my knee, the other still holding a linen napkin smeared with cake from where he tried to help clear the path. "Mia," he says quietly, "look at me." I drag my gaze up to his. His eyes are steady, focused, the way I imagine they are in the ore. "Kate showed me the messages," he says. And half the room heard what he said into that microphone. "This is not on you." My throat goes tight. "My parents are going to say." "I don't care what your parents say," he cuts in, and there's iron in his voice I've never heard before. "If anything like this ever happens again, if he comes near you, if they minimize it, if they let him," he stops, takes a slow breath. "I will file a report myself. Attempted poisoning. Attempted murder if that's what they call it. I'm not letting anyone spin this into a misunderstanding." The winery manager appears next, suit immaculate despite the chaos. He looks at the destroyed cake, the shaken guests, the waitstaff frozen in place. "Mrs. Reeves," he says to Margaret, "we can stop the party now if you'd like. Clear the floor. End early. No charge for the remaining hours. Given everything." All eyes shift to her, then to me. For a second, I feel like a child again, waiting for someone older to decide what happens next. Then I realize, this is my wedding. I stand up. My legs wobble, but they hold. "There are backup desserts, right?" I ask the manager. My voice sounds strange, too bright against the stunned quiet. He blinks. "Yes, of course. Mini tarts, macarons, the sheet cake in the kitchen." "Great," I say. "Can you please have the staff clean this up, bring those out, and open more wine? Anyone who wants to go to the hospital can go. Anyone who wants to stay and celebrate can stay." Margaret's mouth curves the slightest bit. She nods once to the manager. "Do as she asks." And, just like that, the spell breaks. The smashed cake is shoveled away, the floor mopped, the podium wiped down as best as possible. The band switches to something lighter, almost defiant. Trays of backup desserts appear, not fancy like the main cake, but sweet and normal and enough. Some guests leave for the hospital with my parents, clutching their coats, whispering. Others drift away quietly, too uncomfortable to stay. But a lot of people don't move. Evan's colleagues, the cousins who heard every word, my friends from work, Kate, and the people at her table. They stay. They refill their glasses. They pull us onto the dance floor. Somewhere between the second and third song, with my bare feet sticky from where frosting never quite came off the floor, I realize I feel lighter. The worst thing that could have happened has already exploded in front of everyone. There's nothing left to hide. No more pretending Tyler is just lost or a free spirit. His mask, and my parents' illusion of themselves as helpless, loving rescuers, is lying on the floor with the cake crumbs. The next morning, in the quiet of the little guest cottage on the winery property, my phone buzzes with a long message from my mother. Paragraphs of it. How I betrayed my brother by not immediately defending him. How I allowed strangers to judge a private family mistake. How, if I decide to throw away my family over one misunderstanding, then I should forget I ever had parents. For most of my life, that would have been my cue to apologize. To fold myself back into their story. To say, "You're right, I'm sorry, I overreacted." Instead, I sit on the edge of the bed in Evan's t-shirt, my wedding dress crumpled in a corner, and I read the message twice. Then I just delete it. I block my mother's number. Then my father's. Then Tyler's. My thumb hovers for half a second before I hit confirm, and then a strange quiet washes over me. And in that quiet, I make a decision. I will not pay another cent of Tyler's debts. I will not explain away his behavior. I will not keep auditioning for love I already deserved. A year later, our life looks nothing like that chaotic night, and everything like what I used to think was unrealistic. Evan and I live in a small, cozy house on a quiet street. Not a mansion, not a winery estate. Just a place with a tiny front yard, a crooked tree, and a kitchen big enough for us to cook together. I work remotely now, laptop on the dining table, taking product meetings in leggings and fuzzy socks. Evan splits his time between surgery and consulting for digital health projects. There's a crib in the corner of our bedroom, still half assembled, instructions taped to the side. A tiny pair of socks sits on the dresser, next to an ultrasound picture held in place by a wine cork from the night we found out. We talk a lot about how we'll raise this baby. No favorites. No golden child whose mistakes are romanticized as searching for themselves. No other child assigned the role of the strong one, the responsible one, the family doormat. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and my brain won't shut off, I open anonymous forums and write out my story. I use fake names, vague locations. I describe the cake, the microphone, the words "I spiked it," echoing through the hall. And then I ask strangers, was I too harsh? Letting my brother drink what he prepared for me? Not rushing to protect him from the consequences for once. The answers vary, but the truth doesn't. Every time I close the laptop and walk past the half-built crib, every time I see Evan asleep on the couch with a medical journal on his chest and his hand resting unconsciously where our baby kicks, I know. The ruined cake, the shattered image of our perfect family, were a small price to pay for freedom and safety. If you've listened this far, tell me, have you ever had to break up with your own family to save yourself? Share your own story in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you want more real family stories that might make you feel a little less alone in yours.